Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about graduation filters. They are quite self-explanatory, but there's a few tricks to them and there's a lot of useful stuff that we can do with graduation filters. And to be honest, there's a lot of videos coming your way where we use graduation filters in different ways. But here are some simple techniques to get the most out of graduation filters. Enjoy. The first image we're going to look at, and again, we're just dealing with graduation filters here and how a graduation filter can help you. It's a pretty image. We're going to start with fixing composition, as we always do. And there's a slight imbalance with this image. There's a little bit too much ground in the foreground, a little bit less in the ground above the lioness's head. And if we consider confrontation and engagement, I think we can go a bit closer in here, even though we might lose a little bit detail. There's these funny sticks in the foreground, and there's a lot of details in the background that just aren't helping. I'd rather that background have fallen away and be much more blurred, but it's wildlife photography, you don't always get what you want. So I'm going to crop in here and just fill the frame with this moment, because there's lots of little details going on here. Remember when we talked about whether we go close or whether we go wide? If there's small details that are important, then go close, because they'll be lost if you go wide. If there's big details that are important, you're obviously going to have to go wide. There's a lot of little details here. All these cubs' actions, all their movements are important to the story. So going in close, as close as you can, is a good call here. Unfortunately here, there's a stick over one cub's face, which I can't do anything about. So now I'm going to use graduation filters to get this a little bit better, or certain techniques from graduation filters. You click on graduation filters here, and the first thing I want to do in terms of graduation filters is try and remove a bit of detail out of the background here and make it a little bit more interesting and make it conform with my image a little bit more. So I pull a graduation filter over my image like this, quite far down if I want to, somewhere around there actually, let's leave it there. If I click O, I can show my mask. Now I want to affect my background separately. I always talk about that. Your edit should apply to your background, should be different to your subject. So I want to remove the mask on my lion's face. And what do? I click on brush, I hold Alt or Option down, and you can see this brush turns into a negative. So if I start brushing, you can see I start to brush away that mask. And I come all the way up just to where I'm about to hit the edges. And then as I'm about to hit an edge, I hold Command. And what Command does is it auto masks, and it'll try and keep it in the lines. You can see it's keeping it along that edge. It's highlighting just the furs and not the background. This usually works really, really well with this sort of thing. Come along this ear, over there, down there, along this edge. Now, when you come back into your subject and you're not near the edge, let go of Command, because Command will sometimes get confused in those moments and you'll leave the mask in some areas in your subject. So let go, do that hip, do all of that stuff there, make this a little bit bigger. And as I come up to the edge again, I hold Command and I finish off that edge. I come down here, let go of Command, come next to the edge, hold Command. This cub's face, I keep holding Command. Over there, I'm doing this quite quickly. You should do this quite slowly. Make sure you get it right, but somewhere over there is good. Now, the first thing I want to do is remove detail from the background as much as I can. So I can take the texture down, I can take the clarity down, and you can see I'm starting to lose those details which were so strong in the beginning. And I can make the background a little bit easier here, do things that make the background more important than it is. So I can actually add a little bit of exposure. And with that exposure, I'm going to increase the temperature. What this does is it makes it look like nice warm light. You've taken it from the middle of the day to a little bit later or a little bit earlier in the day, where the light's a little bit more interesting and it's a little bit warmer. And in fact, you can add another graduation filter just like this. If I click New and I pull one in from the side here, I can add a little bit of brightness there and a little bit of temperature. And it looks like a nice warm light is coming in. Now your background's working with you a little bit more instead of working against you with all these details and lines and shit that you don't want. We've softened the lines in the background, we've softened those details, and we've added a bit of warm light to make it a little bit easier to look at. If we look at the before and after, if I click Done and I click before and after, you can see now our image is much more vibrant and much more easier to look at. The background's a little bit more interesting. And that was just using graduation filters. There's a few things more I'll do to this image, a little bit of clarity on my cubs and a little bit of texture, and there's probably a few things more than that. But just using graduation filters, we've made it much easier to look at, much prettier to look at. The next image we're going to look at is also a line. And first, like I always say, we fix our composition. There's a big horizontal line we want to straighten out, so we just click and we straighten that out, and now we've got a good composition. Now this is when the rule of thirds can work against you. Technically, we want to keep our line as close to that PowerPoint as possible. That's what the rule of thirds tells us. But in this situation, I think we can do better. Although there's nothing wrong with this composition, we can do better. What is important in this frame? Minimalism. What is non-essential to this frame? The sky to me is essential. The line to me is essential. The ground is not as essential. We want to emphasize this dramatic sky that's going on. We want to make it more dramatic. That's what's important to the scene. So why not put the rule of thirds in the trash and do what your instincts tell you? So if I unlock our crop function over here and crop the ground out to about there, it's not important. Let's straighten it out a little bit more. Right there. The ground's not important as the sky. If you have 2/3 sky and 1/3 ground, you're giving emphasis to the sky. If you have 1/3 sky and 2/3 ground, whatever is in the ground is more important. You want to give emphasis to that. Here, I want a lot of emphasis on my sky. So I can defy the rule of thirds here and take away even more ground and give more emphasis to my sky and make a more powerful image. And now let's get on to graduation filters. There's two techniques we're going to look at over here. The first, I want a little bit more brightness on my line. So if I grab a graduation filter and bring it up from the bottom like this, we're going to use a range mask here to add a little bit of brightness to our line, but we're going to use the luminosity range mask. If we come down to range masks and click luminosity and click the dipstick over here, click on our line, and now we increase the exposure. You can see we've increased the exposure of our line. I also want to increase, remember when we increase exposures of things, we can lose contrast, we can use clarity on that object. I don't want to do that. So once I've lifted the exposure to where I'd like it to be, I want to add contrast back and a little bit of clarity. Usually does the trick. A little bit more contrast, somewhere around there, and now we've got a little bit more contrast. Our line's got a little bit more exposure now and a little bit more clarity, and we find it a little bit better in the frame. It sits better in the frame. The next thing I want to do is I want to make my sky crazy dramatic. We love dramatic skies. So let's come down into this. Now, the old technique of doing this would be simply to down the exposure and you make your sky more dramatic. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That looks quite nice and dramatic, but there's a lot of loss of textures and graduations and luminosity that we lost that made it even more dramatic and more pleasing to look at. So we're going to do things slightly differently. Again, there's one way of doing this, which is using your blacks. Because there's dark areas and bright areas here, I could down my blacks and get a slightly different effect. But the best way to do this is, again, use your range mask. Go to luminance like this, use your dipstick, and select the darker area. Just click on it like this, and you've selected that dark area. Now, you take the exposure down, and you can see we've retained those details in the cloud. Let's bring that down. Click our dipstick back. Let's bring that down a little bit more, somewhere over there. And now you can see we've created a nice, beautiful sky. If I look at the before and after, you can see the drama in the sky. You can see how beautiful and dramatic it is. So that's another way of using graduation filters that's really important. And the next photo that we're going to get into is a similar concept, but just a little bit more sophisticated. Let's get it. You can see this is an image of two cheetah, and I want to bring some light onto our cheetah, and I want to bring, again, the clouds out of this horizon, but there's some colors in that horizon which I'm quite interested in. So we're going to use graduation filters to edit this image. My first thing that's wrong with this image, again, we check our composition. Lines are pretty straight. There's two lines and they're both at a different angle, so that looks fine to me. The next thing we've got to do is use a graduation filter. The cheetahs themselves are a little bit too dark. Now, to reserve those colors in the sky, I purposefully shot this underexposed. If I exposed correctly for the cheetahs, I wouldn't have these soft blues and oranges in the sky. I would have blown those out. So I purposefully shot this with the idea that I was going to lift a bit of exposure on my cheetahs, but reserve those colors in the sky. So I put a graduation filter over my cheetahs, and what do I need first? I need a little bit of exposure, somewhere around there. And again, when you lift exposure, you sometimes lose contrast. So let's just do a little bit of contrast, maybe a little bit of clarity, a little bit more exposure. We'll get back to those cheetahs at a later stage, but that's good enough for now. Now, let's do the sky. Again, we're going to use a graduation filter here, and just dropping the exposure to try and make them more dramatic is just not going to work here. You can see it's very even, and you've lost that contrast and you've lost that drama. So we're going to select using color ranges. First, we're going to select luminosity, and we're going to select the shadows here. The shadows are mainly the front of the clouds, not the sky behind them. So let's go down to our range mask over here. Click luminance, click your dipstick, and click on those shadowed areas over there. And now we're going to do two things. We're going to drop the exposure. You can see now that is selecting just those clouds over there. Although I think I'm going to move the dipstick around a little bit and see if I can get a little bit more contrast. That's about good. Increase the clarity just a touch, And the last thing I'm going to do is just drop the temperature slightly. That's adding a little bit of blue into those clouds, and what that color contrast is going to do is we're going to really make those clouds pop. Now I'm going to put this dipstick back. I'm going to duplicate this, make 2 of them like that. This one I'm going to 0 everything like this, like there. I'm going to get my dipstick back. I'm going to choose color this time, and I'm going to select those oranges in between there. And once I've selected those colors, the first thing I'm going to do is just increase the exposure just a little bit. You can see I can manipulate that exposure. That's the sky behind the clouds. A little bit of exposure, and I want those oranges to pop now. So increase my temperature like that. And now those oranges in the sky are starting to pop just a little bit and make this a little bit more lively. Let's go a little bit more like that. Let's take the exposure down. Let's get that orange perfect. Done. Now we've got those oranges and blues coming down. I'm going to put one more graduation filter over the whole lot, just like this, and make a global edit and just increase the contrast. And that, remember what I said about those global edits? This is global just according to the sky. They bring those edits together and help them blend more naturally. If I click done and look at the before and after, you can see the effect we've had on this image just using graduation filters. And the last picture we're going to do is a very simple technique, and this is part of a video that I'm creating called the f2.8. It's trying to make a blurry background where your subject jumps out at you a little bit more. Not all of us have an f2.8 lens, but there's a lot of ways you can create that effect using Lightroom and Photoshop. I'm going to do a very basic one here, which is just using graduation filters. So what I'm trying to do is make my background a little bit blurrier, take away the clarity, take away the texture. So I grab a graduation filter like so, and I pull it over my frame like this, just enough to cover the whole foreground. If I click O, you can see where I'm affecting all the background, which is what I want, but I'm affecting the lines face too. Now, as we've done before, if I click on brush like this, I get a brush option, and if I hold Option or Alt down, I can start to brush away some of this mask, some of its effect. Without holding Command at this stage, we brush away the line's mane, his face entirely, and now you might get to the fur and you think, what are we going to do here? I can't go around every piece of fur like in the old days. But the Command tool is your best friend. As soon as you get to the edge, hold Command and go along the edge like this, and you can see it's auto masking. It's grabbing just the fur and not touching the background, which is what you want. You want your edits to stay in the background. You go around the back like this, a little bit more on that ear over there. There we go. And now we've got the fur, and now we've removed the mask from the fur. We don't want it to affect the fur. We want sharpness in the fur. I click O like this, and now I've affected just the background. And now I can do what I like with the textures. I can remove clarity like this. And if I look at the before and after, I've almost created an f2.8 effect here. I've taken away clarity and I've taken away texture from the background, and my viewer is drawn to my subject that much easier. So that's a few tricks of graduation filters. I hope you enjoyed. There's lots more to come on this subject. We can never stop talking about it. We can never really stop talking about it. So keep an eye out for more videos on graduation filters and Lightroom edits and some Photoshop to come soon. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.